Can you not say things like that in front of him? That's what I whispered quietly, almost kindly. She didn't even turn toward me. She just took another sip of her orange juice, smiled at the man across from her and said, "It's not like he understands half of what we talk about anyway." The man chuckled. It was soft, polished, practiced. The kind of laugh you use when you know you're being chosen. My fork didn't reach my mouth. It hovered there, mad, trembling slightly in my hand. Pancake syrup clung to the silver like it didn't want to fall. I stared at her, not in confusion, not in shock, just in silence. Like if I stayed still long enough, maybe I could convince my brain I misheard it. Maybe I could pretend she didn't just erase me with one offhand remark. But the way she tilted her head at him like he was gravity and she was letting herself fall, that was the confirmation. That was the blade under the words. She forgot I was sitting right there, or worse, she remembered and didn't care. They kept talking about presentations, about that weekend trip, about how last time he got them the best suite. My knuckles turned pale around the fork. The waitress brought the check. I slid my card into the leather pouch before either of them reached for it. No one stopped me. No one thanked me. She was too busy explaining how she could never go back to sharing ideas with people who just nod and smile. The words weren't aimed at me, but they hit me like shrapnel anyway. I stood up slowly. My legs were heavy, like wading through molasses. I couldn't feel my feet. I could barely see straight. But I stood up, and that was enough to start something I couldn't undo. She finally looked at me, and that's when I realized her expression didn't change. There was no guilt, no surprise, just a blink, like she'd forgotten I was part of this scene and suddenly remembered I was. "You're not leaving already, are you?" she asked, almost amused. I didn't answer. I didn't even shake my head. I just left the receipt signed, the chair pushed in, and a piece of my dignity folded under the napkin. Outside it was sunny, but I swear it felt like winter. I didn't drive home right away. I got in the car, buckled my seatbelt, and just sat there, not thinking, not crying, just existing. My hands rested on the steering wheel like I was waiting for someone to give me directions on how to breathe again. I stared out the windshield. People were walking past the restaurant patio, laughing, sipping iced coffee, pulling their kids by the hand. Life was still happening out there, as if my whole sense of reality hadn't just shifted 6 into the left. My phone buzzed once. Her name lit up the screen. "You okay?" was all it said. I didn't answer. She'd never texted me from the table before. Not once in the years we'd been together. She always said texting at the table was rude, but I guess that rule didn't apply when she was texting her husband from across a table where her attention was already spoken for. I drove eventually, but not home. I went to the park by 4th in Bellevue, the one with the crooked bench under the twisted pine. I used to take her there when we first started dating. We'd sneak in milkshakes and talk about which dog breeds we'd have someday. Today, I sat on that same bench and realized I didn't know who that girl was anymore. Or maybe I never did. Maybe she was always orbiting someone else and I was just the quiet moon pretending I had gravity of my own. I thought about the way she looked at him. Jesse, that's his name. Jesse from her department. Jesse, who used to be annoying and then suddenly became the guy who gets it. I remember when she first mentioned him. I remember brushing it off. I remember telling myself to grow up and not be jealous of a guy who wears desert boots and quotes marketing podcasts. And now, I can't unsee the way she smiled at him like I was the coworker and he was the man she came with. You know what really got to me? Not the sentence itself, not the subtle insult. It was the ease, The casual cruelty, the way it rolled out of her mouth like it was just another sentence in a day full of sentences, as if she hadn't rehearsed it, as if it didn't cost her anything. That kind of honesty isn't spontaneous. That kind of dig comes from somewhere deep, and it only surfaces when someone thinks you're too small to understand you've been buried. When I finally made it home, her car was already in the driveway. She had beaten me there. For a split second, I imagined she'd be standing by the door, eyes red, maybe panicked, maybe apologetic. But the lights in the living room were low, the TV was on, and she was curled up on the couch in that oversized sweatshirt she wears when she's trying to look casual but calculated. "Hey," she said as I walked in. "Not. I'm sorry, not. Can we talk? Just, hey." I didn't respond. I walked past her into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at the tile floor until my pulse came back down. "You didn't have to rush out like that," she said from the couch. It looked dramatic. Dramatic? That word? That stupid word. She used it like I was the one who'd made a scene. Like standing up after being publicly diminished was a performance, not self-preservation. I finally spoke. "Do you actually believe what you said?" She didn't answer right away. She muted the TV, took a breath, then shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe I was just being honest. I mean, sometimes I feel like Jesse just gets me. Like, intellectually." And just like that, the word intellectually became the sharpest weapon I'd ever encountered. She didn't yell. She didn't curse. She didn't even raise her voice. But what she said, it carved something deep and quiet and permanent. I didn't sleep that night. I lay beside her, fully clothed, eyes wide, body stiff. She curled into her side of the bed and fell asleep easily. I could hear her breathing slow. She even laughed in her sleep once. And me? I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time she laughed because of something I said. I couldn't. The morning after the pancake place, I sat at the kitchen table long before she woke up, staring at a Post-it note and a pen. I kept thinking maybe I'd leave something, just one sentence, a question, a thought, something. Anything that would make her sit up and realize what she'd done. But every sentence I started sounded pathetic before I even finished writing it. Did you mean it? Is Jesse everything I'm not? Was it always this easy for you to ignore me? I crumpled them one by one and filled the trash with balled-up yellow squares. The house was quiet in that strange, accusatory way only silence can be. You know, the kind where the hum of the fridge feels louder than your own heartbeat, and even the creak of your chair sounds like betrayal. When she finally came down, she looked surprised to see me still there. "Didn't you say you had a meeting this morning?" "I canceled it," I said. She blinked, then shrugged and poured herself coffee. That was it. No curiosity, no concern, no conversation. Then, without sitting, she said, "I'm meeting Jesse for lunch. We have to review the Wexler pitch together." That name again, Jesse. It used to mean nothing to me. Now it sat in my stomach like a stone. "Is that why you're really meeting him?" I asked. She stopped pouring cream halfway and glanced at me like I'd asked if the moon was made of cheese. "What's that supposed to mean?" I stood up, finally gathering what little courage I had left. "Do you actually think I didn't notice what was going on at breakfast yesterday? Do you think I'm that blind?" For a second, she looked like she might get defensive, but then she exhaled and shook her head almost pityingly. "Calver, you always overthink everything. You always have. That's part of the problem. You create stories in your head instead of just being present." That word again, problem. I was a problem now. "I didn't create anything," I said, my voice shaking. "You told a man in front of me that he understands you better than I ever have. That's not fiction. That's what came out of your mouth. She sipped her coffee and walked out of the room, leaving the sin of vanilla creamer and apathy behind her. I wanted to yell. I wanted to follow her and demand clarity. But I didn't because something inside me knew, really knew that she wasn't going to give it, because she already had loud and clear. It was just wrapped in sarcasm and false innocence. The rest of the day I spent walking. I left the house and just wandered through side streets, past old stores, around the lake where she once said she wanted to grow old with me. I passed by a bookstore and went in for no reason other than to not be alone with my thoughts. I picked up a novel I'll never finish and stood by the window pretending to read. There was an older couple sitting outside at a cafe table. The woman touched the man's wrist while laughing, and he looked at her like she was still the girl from his memory. And I realized I never looked at Renly like that anymore. But worse than that, she'd stopped pretending to look at me that way too. When I got home, her car wasn't in the driveway. Her purse was gone, so was her laptop. I knew exactly where she was and with whom. This time I didn't sit on the couch. I didn't stare at the wall waiting for her return like some rejected dog by the window. Instead, I opened my laptop and started something I hadn't dared to before. A folder titled Contingency. It wasn't a plan, not yet, but it was the beginning of me figuring out who I was without her and whether I had anything left to salvage inside myself. She didn't come home until after 10 o'clock. I was still awake, though I pretended not to be. I lay on my side of the bed, eyes shut, breathing slow, steady, like I'd already drifted off. But the second I heard the garage door open, every nerve in my body lit up like static. The footsteps were soft, intentional. She took off her shoes quietly, something she never did when she came home from work. I listened to the faint rustle of her coat, the low chime of her phone being set on the table, and then the water running in the bathroom for exactly 3 minutes. She brushed her teeth, but she didn't come near the bed right away. I heard her in the closet, then the kitchen again, stalling. When she finally slipped into bed beside me, she didn't even sigh like she normally does. No exhale, no shifting, just silence. A mutual act of pretending. Two strangers playing sleep on opposite sides of a shared mattress. I stared into the darkness, blinking into the void. She was so close, her outline just inches from mine. And yet, I'd never felt more invisible. The next morning, I went to the mirror and barely recognized what stared back at me. My eyes looked hollow, like they belonged to someone who hadn't cried only because he no longer had the energy to. I traced my jawline with my hand and felt the uneven stubble. I hadn't shaved in days. I hadn't even noticed. Something broke in me as I stood there, something quiet but irreversible. I reached for my razor not out of habit, but like it was some ceremonial act. A goodbye, not to her, to the version of me that tolerated becoming a background character in his own life. I shaved slowly, methodically. Then I put on the cologne she once said made me smell like serious decisions. I didn't do it for her. I did it to remind myself that I used to matter to someone. If not her, then at least to the man I used to be before I shrunk into silence. I went to work, but I didn't do anything. I opened documents. I scrolled through old emails. I stared at my inbox like it was filled with ghosts. Then I clicked open the contingency folder I'd started the day before. Inside there were only 3 things. A photo of us on our honeymoon, her smiling. Me laughing at something she whispered in my ear. I don't remember what it was. That scared me more than anything. A budget spreadsheet. I'd started mapping out what life might look like financially if this all fell apart. A blank document titled, Letter to Myself. It wasn't even 1 paragraph long, just a single sentence. If she doesn't love you, why are you still choosing her? I stared at that line for a long time. Then I closed the laptop and went home early. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, not cooking, just leaning on the counter, scrolling through her phone absent-mindedly, eating grapes from a bowl. "Oh," she said, glancing up. "Didn't expect you this early." "I know." She tilted her head. "Everything okay?" And in that moment, something inside me laughed. Not out loud, just deep in the pit of my soul. The part she couldn't reach anymore. She asked if everything was okay, as if we hadn't been quietly unraveling for weeks, as if the air between us wasn't full of words unsaid and truths unacknowledged. "You tell me," I replied. She narrowed her eyes. "Are we doing this again?" I nodded. "No, we're just finally not pretending anymore." I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I didn't say Jessie's name. I just walked past her upstairs into the guest bedroom. I closed the door, not to shut her out, but to keep myself in. That night I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because I was okay, but because I was finally not lying to myself anymore. And the silence between us, it was no longer something I feared. It was something I understood. 3 days passed. 3 full days without a single real conversation between us. We spoke only in functional fragments. "There's more detergent under the sink. I'm working late tomorrow. Can you move your car?" But nothing real, nothing personal. She didn't ask why I'd moved to the guest room. She didn't knock, didn't text, didn't attempt anything resembling affection. It was like she silently accepted the new arrangement, as if she'd been waiting for the dam to break and was relieved it finally had. The house was quieter than ever. Too quiet. Not peaceful. Sterile. On the 4th night, I overheard her on the phone. I had meant to eavesdrop. I was walking past the hallway toward the laundry room when I heard her voice behind the nearly shut door of the study. It wasn't the tone of voice she used with clients or her mother. It was softer but quicker, like someone slipping between raindrops, afraid to be seen. I stopped without meaning to. My hand hovered just above the doorknob, frozen. "I don't know what he wants anymore," she said. "No, he hasn't said anything about it. He just exists. He's like background noise." There was a pause. Then I heard her laugh, quiet, like a secret she'd told 1,000 times but still found funny. "No, of course not. I don't feel guilty. It's not like I lied." Another pause, she added, almost in a whisper. "Technically, I never crossed the line. Technically, I backed away carefully. Like, if the floor creaked too loud, it would give me away." I sat on the edge of the bathtub in the hallway bathroom and stared at the tile. She hadn't cheated. Not in the classic, obvious way. No hotel receipts, no suspicious texts, no late-night lipstick smears or perfume that wasn't hers. But the betrayal wasn't in what she did. It was in what she allowed to grow, in what she nourished when she should have been saving what was left of us. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table and waited for her. She came down wearing workout clothes, hair tied back, water bottle in hand. She paused when she saw me sitting there like it hadn't occurred to her I might exist before 8 a.m. "Hey," she said, casual, guarded. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Can I ask you something?" She looked up from her phone. "Sure." I kept my voice low, steady. "Do you love him?" Her face barely moved, but her fingers tightened around the water bottle. "You mean Jessie?" I nodded. She didn't answer immediately. She sat down across from me, placed the bottle on the table and tapped her fingers along the side of it for a moment. Then she said something I will never forget. "I don't know if it's love," she said, "but it feels easier. Easier." As if love were a matter of convenience. As if the years I'd spent trying to support her through breakdowns, anxiety, late nights, career changes, meant less than the ease of talking to a man who hadn't carried any of it. "I stayed," I said softly, trying to steady the tremble in my throat. "Even when you pushed me away. Even when I felt like I was holding up a marriage you'd already walked out of emotionally. I stayed." She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't say thank you, or I'm sorry, or please don't leave. She just nodded once like she was acknowledging a fact, not a tragedy. I looked at her then. Not the way I used to, not the way I wanted to, but the way you look at a house you used to live in. Familiar, distant, empty. "I don't think I can do this anymore," I whispered. She blinked, but again no real reaction, no reaching across the table, no flash of regret. "I figured," she replied. I left the kitchen. I didn't pack. I didn't scream. I didn't write a note. Instead, I drove to my brother's place across town and asked if I could crash for a few nights. He didn't ask questions. He just opened the door wider and pulled an extra pillow from the closet. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like someone saw me. Not as a placeholder, not as background noise, but as a man who was finally learning how to hear himself again. 2 nights into staying at my brother's place, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I left my phone off, not silent, not do not disturb. I turned it completely off, placed it on his kitchen counter, and walked out onto the back deck with a mug of stale coffee and a head full of noise. It was cold, the kind of cold that seeps under your skin slowly, as if asking permission to be felt. It was strange being there. His house smelled like wood polish and dog treats. It didn't smell like her. It didn't smell like neglect, and that felt jarring, like I had wandered into someone else's calm. I think that was when it hit me. I built my entire adult life around avoiding stillness because stillness meant you had to feel everything. The following afternoon, I needed clothes. Most of mine were still at home in drawers I had organized by color just so I'd feel like I had control over something. I texted her to let her know I'd be stopping by while she was at work. No reply. Didn't surprise me. I let myself in around noon. The house was cleaner than usual. Suspiciously so. No dishes in the sink. No crumbs on the counter. Candles lit in the middle of the day like someone was staging the place for a showing. As I walked through the house collecting a few shirts, socks, a pair of running shoes I hadn't worn since last April, I noticed a small printed receipt on the hallway table. It wasn't hidden. It was just placed like a prop left behind during a dress rehearsal. 2 guests. Friday, 7:00 p.m. Weston and Elm. Weston and Elm wasn't just any restaurant. It was our place. The spot I took her to when she got her first major promotion. The one with the patio lights strung across the trees like fairy lights, and the overpriced truffle pasta we both pretended was worth it. But this time, I wasn't the reservation. It was for this Friday, 2 nights from now. I stared at that small slip of paper until the edges blurred. She was moving on, not in theory, not emotionally, logistically. I wondered if she had planned what she'd wear. If she'd do that thing with her hair where she tucks it behind one ear like she's inviting you to notice her. I wondered if she'd sit at the same table we once shared, ordering wine with someone who knew nothing about the time she cried into her salad over a panic attack she didn't see coming. I put the receipt back exactly where I found it. I didn't rip it. didn't take a picture. I just left it there like it wasn't mine to touch because it wasn't. I packed quietly, methodically. Nothing sentimental, just essentials. Before I left, I stood in the doorway of the bedroom we used to sleep in and stared at the den and the pillow on her side. Then mine. Mine was untouched, as if the space where I once belonged had already sealed itself up. That night, I didn't sleep at my brother's. I drove for hours. No destination, just miles. I passed gas stations I didn't stop at, towns I couldn't name. And at one point, I found myself parked at a rest stop in front of a vending machine, wondering if a bag of chips could keep me company. I called my dad. We hadn't spoken in a while. When he picked up, his voice cracked a little, either from sleep or surprise. Maybe both. "You okay, son?" And I broke, not into tears, into truth. "No," I said, "but I think I'm finally starting to understand why." There was a pause. Then he asked if I needed him to drive out and meet me. I said no. I just needed someone to know I was still out here, still real, that I hadn't disappeared completely. The next morning I got a message from her, just one line. "I'll be gone most of the weekend. Can we talk Sunday?" There was no mention of where she was going, no apology, no reference to anything she knew I'd already seen. I didn't answer. I didn't need to because by then I had finally started to mourn someone who was still alive. And that's a different kind of death entirely. Sunday arrived faster than I expected. Strange how time plays tricks on you when your life doesn't belong to you anymore. My body still followed a schedule. Wake up, shower, drink coffee. But my mind was on a loop, stuck in this hollow limbo between grief and numbness. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just floated, waiting for something that wasn't coming. I hadn't answered her message. I didn't say yes to the talk, but she assumed I'd come anyway. That was always her way. When she wanted control, she used silence as a leash, and I always showed up, pulling gently against it, hoping this time she'd tug back with love. But I wasn't the same man anymore. Still, I went. Not to talk, not even to listen. I went to see, to look her in the eyes and know without being told that she was gone for good, even if her body was still here. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was already there. No second car, no Jesse, no proof, just absence. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house looked like it hadn't been lived in all weekend. Mail stacked near the entry, one wine glass in the sink. The jacket flung over the arm of the couch that didn't belong to either of us. It wasn't Jesse's. It was too small. My breath caught. I heard her voice before I saw her. "No, I didn't tell him yet. He just got here." Then laughter, male, not Jesse. I froze in place. I wasn't supposed to be hearing this. "Trust me," she said. "He's not going to make it ugly. That's not who Calver is. He'll do what he always does. Nod, smile, and disappear." There was silence. Then she added more softly, "He won't fight. That's what makes this easy." The words hit me harder than anything else in the past 2 weeks. Not because they were cruel, not even because they were wrong, but because they were true. She didn't need to betray me with passion or rage or scandal. She just needed me to keep being quiet, to keep accepting, to keep walking away every time she pushed. And I had, over and over. I didn't go into the room. I didn't announce myself. I turned around and walked right back out the door, got into my car and drove 4 blocks before pulling over and finally breathing again. She'd already moved on emotionally, romantically, strategically. Jesse wasn't the only one. There was someone else now, someone I hadn't even seen coming. The wine glass, the laughter, the new jacket. She wasn't mourning the end, she was engineering it. She wanted me to leave without a fight, to be the ghost who signed the divorce papers, handed her the house, and faded out of the story so she could start a new one without conflict. I realized then the fight wasn't between me and another man. The fight was between me and my silence. So I turned around, not to scream, not to beg, but it ended on my terms. I walked back into the house. Her voice went quiet the second she saw me. "Calther," she said, startled, I thought. I heard everything I said. Calm, final. The man beside her stood up, uncomfortable. He was maybe late 30s, lean, the kind of guy who looked like he only lived in places with clean lines and quiet exits. "You can go," I told him. "This doesn't involve you anymore." He glanced at her, then grabbed his jacket and left without a word. Renly crossed her arms. "So what now? You want to yell at me?" I shook my head. "No, I want to give you what you really wanted." She frowned. I pulled a folded envelope from my jacket pocket and placed it on the table. Inside, a list of items I'd be removing from the house, a forwarding address, and a single line at the bottom that read, "You were right. I won't fight, but I'm done being invisible." She stared at it like it was a threat. It wasn't. It was a farewell. Without another word, I left. And for the first time in years, the silence I walked into didn't feel empty. It felt earned. 2 weeks passed after I left the envelope on the table. I didn't hear from her. Not a text, not a call, not even a late-night ping asking if I was okay. And honestly, I think that was the best gift she ever gave me. The cleanest kind of goodbye. No dragging, no guilt, no pretending. The silence she once weaponized became the soil I finally grew in. I moved into a small loft above a hardware store on the east side of town. It wasn't fancy. 1 bedroom, old radiator heat, a faucet that groans when you ask it for hot water. But it was mine. I picked out furniture I liked. I chose bedding without asking someone else's opinion. I kept the place tidy, not out of fear of being criticized, but because it gave me peace. I went back to the park near Bellevue, the one with the crooked bench and the pine that leans like it's always listening. I sat there for an hour one Saturday sipping gas station coffee, watching kids run after pigeons. And for the first time in months, I laughed out loud. Not because someone said something funny, but because I realized I didn't feel heavy anymore. Grief had loosened its grip. And freedom, I learned, didn't feel like fireworks or epiphanies. It felt like waking up without flinching, like opening your eyes and not dreading the sound of footsteps in the hallway. It felt like reclaiming your own space without asking permission. One morning I bumped into someone, literally. At a local bookstore turning the corner near the poetry aisle, I collided shoulder first with a woman carrying too many books and not enough ballots. The stack tumbled between us. She apologized, I apologized, and we both knelt to gather the fallen pages. She handed me a copy of a collection I hadn't read since college. "You like Mary Oliver?" she asked. I nodded. She kept me sane once. The woman, her name was Elise, smiled at that. That's the best kind of writer. We ended up sharing a table in the cafe corner of the store. It wasn't a date, it wasn't romantic. It was just easy, light, real. We talked about everything but relationships. We talked about old music, awkward family reunions, and the fact that neither of us could keep a houseplant alive longer than a week. And before we parted ways, she said, "You look like someone who just got out of something heavy, but not bitter, just braver." I walked away carrying no phone number, no expectations, just the realization that I still had the capacity to connect, to be seen, to start again. Later that week, my divorce papers arrived, signed. No note inside, just a signature at the bottom of a life we used to share. I didn't mourn. I didn't drink. I didn't lie on the floor and listen to sad playlists. I just signed my name next to hers, placed the packet in the prepaid envelope, and walked it down to the mailbox. The walk back to the loft felt different. Not lighter, not heavier. Just mine. Renly let go first. She gave up on us before I even realized we were sinking. But in a way, I'm glad she did, because if she hadn't, I never would have left. I never would have heard my own voice again. I never would have realized that being chosen by someone else means nothing if you keep choosing to disappear in the process. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not sad. I'm alive. And that's more than I ever thought I'd feel.